We have a great panel in store for you today, and just to give you a background on what we'll be doing, we'll be discussing the Canadian landscape here today. And Canada has attracted a lot of attention in recent years for its a pivotal role in the development of AI technologies. Jeffrey Hinton is a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, and that's brought a lot of attention to the groundbreaking work done in deep learning. The Vector Institute here in Toronto has been at the forefront of supporting AI researchers as well as initiatives in different domains such as health. And Canada really can stake a role for itself as the best place to be a researcher or an entrepreneur. Our government provides liberal support for funding new technologies and new companies, and we have a great international reputation for the ethics of emerging technologies. And with all that, we want to cover from the founder's perspective what it's like being in Canada. And we have two excellent founders with us here today. The first is CG Chen. CG is the founder of Ample Labs, a tech nonprofit that empowers people facing homelessness using technology. The organization focuses on AI and uses chatbot technology to help municipalities connect and offer support and services to the city's homeless. Welcome, CG.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Great. And the next is Arsene Toumani. He is the founder of Telostouch. With a background specializing in creating agile teams, he recently started Telostouch. The organization created a platform that helps financial advisors improve their relationships with clients and help drive business outcomes. Welcome, Arsene.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Great. So let's first begin with introducing your companies. These are both pretty new companies. They're really at the forefront of industrializing technologies and finding clear business problems for them to have. So I'm wondering if you can give us a big background about your journey in founding these organizations and what the organization goals are. So let's start with CG.
Yeah, for sure, Ryan. And hello, Arsene. So Ample Labs really started, to be honest, at the side of my desk. So prior to founding Ample, I worked at Ecobee, a great, smart thermostat, great AI company here in Canada. And prior to that, another VC-backed SaaS company. So my background's in tech. I'm personally very passionate about technology. And really the idea of Ample kind of came about when a good friend of mine had actually experienced homelessness. And so it was actually through personally journeying with him and, essentially helping him navigate a eviction that I found myself asking, why is it so hard to figure out what to do if I'm first time homeless? And this could happen really to any of us. And I think with COVID-19, we're really seeing that. And so really the question just came, when we said, is there a better way to find services aside from Google? Because it seems like people predominantly turn to Google. And so that was sort of at the beginning of Ample and this concept of Chalmers, where you can ask AI a question and it can help you navigate homelessness potentially. So our co-founding team, we said to ourselves, how can we leverage all of this amazing emerging technology in AI and voice and NLP and really apply it to a complex problem, an important one, such as homelessness. So that's how we got started.
Well, it's great to hear. And it's great to hear that this technology is being used for social good. And it's wonderful to have you here and be a motivation for others. And so Arsene, if you want to give us a little background on Telostouch.
Yep, absolutely. So about myself first. I'm co-founder and CTO of Telostouch, and really I've spent the past decade leading agile teams ranging from development to product to security and operations. And really I've always been very passionate about improving industries that are not the most efficient. And that would go for the case of financial services, which is the industry that Telostouch is in. And essentially what happened, how we got started, this was 3.5 years ago. And my business partner, Jad, had come to me really with an idea to build a remote engagement platform for financial advisors to better understand their clients, to recommend right services. And at the time, I knew that this was someone who had the right expertise. He had previously been a financial advisor for many years. And with my technical background as well, it made sense to go ahead and tackle this worthy problem. And so what happened is we sat down together, we built the product, we built a great team, and managed to land our first institutional client after the first year. And it's funny because later on, the president of that institution is actually currently our head of wealth management. So that's additional validation there on that front. But currently, our team is comprised of researchers, developers, and industry experts. And right now, we're servicing some of the Canada and US's largest institutions. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And it's great to hear just the role that the people you knew played in helping you found your companies and the way that the other things Canada provides for young and innovative professionals to meet each other. And that's fascinating. So let's get into the first meaty question, which is, what would be the biggest challenge you faced when getting your company set up? And what made those challenges comparatively hard to be in Canada relative to in the States?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So I would say number one for us was early on, we noticed that Canadian investors were a lot more conservative than the ones that would be in the States. And we knew that we definitely had to validate our idea and our product in the market before getting a VC here in Canada to jump on board. So access to capital early on was something that was definitely more of a struggle as a Canadian startup. And that's why we bootstrapped the company early on. We put our own money in to start things and to validate the market and get it going. So that would be number one, access to capital. So conservative investment versus more riskier from what you get down in the valley. Number two would be the fact that in the industry, which is financial services, fintech adoption for financial institutions here in Canada is comparatively low compared to institutions down in the US. And what has happened is that we found ourselves having to educate institutions here in Canada a lot more than in the US, right? So when we would go to some US institutions and talk about remote engagement for financial advisors, they would totally get it. Here in Canada, it had to be more, a lot more work to get them there, right? But things have been good so far, and yeah, so those would be the two main challenges that we experienced in the first year.
How about yourself, CG?
Yeah, no, I totally jump on that. On top of what Arsene has said, I think what's really interesting is, having come from sort of the startup tech ecosystem here in Toronto, and starting a not-for-profit, this whole sector is different and operates very differently. So I think funding has been definitely been one of the biggest challenges. I think in the States, you can point to a lot of quote unquote successful tech nonprofits like Khan Academy or Mozilla or Wikipedia. You can't really do that in Canada, right? And so when we look at who funds early stage nonprofits that are trying to leverage technology, that are trying to do all of this work, there aren't. I think also from a philanthropic standpoint, I would say there aren't a lot of funders out there. And so when you look at the entire ecosystem of who really then funds early stage tech nonprofits, there aren't any. Right. And so what happens in philanthropy is that most of the funding goes to the United Way, and the covenant houses. And so to get that, that funding in the very beginning is difficult. And I think the other thing is because we don't have great examples, and I would say the same with Arsene, we spent, about a quarter in San Francisco. We went through an amazing tech accelerator. And there are just so many more, I guess, open-minded or open-minded philanthropists, open-minded funders, I would say down in the States, who really believe technology can be leveraged for social change. I think in Canada, we're still kind of experiencing that, and we're still looking for those, examples. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess so capital constraint is a common theme to both of you. Do you see the capital ecosystem in Canada maturing, or do you think that there's anything we can do to make capital more accessible for people?
I think I can answer that quickly. I think one of the most interesting things that we've seen with COVID-19 is that COVID-19, for us has really exacerbated the need for something like Chalmers in municipalities and cities. But also I think within, philanthropy, within, I guess you could say, kind of adjacent to impact investing, the space of social enterprises and things like that is also really exacerbated, capital pouring into the sector. So never before in the history, like I think since like the Great Depression, has the federal government, flooded like, hundreds of millions of dollars into the social services sector to tackle or to be prepared for things like massive amounts of unemployment and homelessness, right? And so that's been really interesting to see. And I think the other thing that's been really interesting is, we're having conversations with municipalities before COVID-19, but as soon as COVID-19 hit, I think the openness to adopt technology has been, it's just really sped up these conversations. So I think that's been the most interesting thing to observe the space.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Yeah, you would think that the pandemic would do the opposite, but it's really interesting that, even when people are constrained and so worried about healthcare needs now, they're also more open to try radical changes and departures. Arsene, is there anything you would like to add as well?
Yeah, well, I would just echo what CG said, which is really you've seen that with COVID. Really, a lot of investors who were investing in traditional businesses, right, have realized that with something like COVID, right, and a lot of industries have had to move to something more digital, right? And you've seen technology businesses have thrived, a lot of them during these times. So that definitely impacts where the money is. I think that moving forward, we're going to see a lot more capital flowing into sectors that didn't previously have that capital on the technology side.
And so Canada's maturing on this point, and so hopefully that's not something that we're never going to have as much money as the United States, but hopefully that's something that isn't a reason people leave anymore. But despite that, you guys both decided to stay in Canada. And so I'm wondering, what are the unique opportunities Canada's afforded you? Why is it that you chose to be here? CG?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can go first. Yeah, I mean, for us, Canada is our backyard, right? So we started here in Toronto. Toronto is a big, a pretty big, dense urban area. But from an impact standpoint, because we're a not-for-profit, we're really sort of, when we think about our product even, we're looking for product impact fit versus product market fit. And when we think about what are we ultimately trying to achieve, right? It's not more revenue, it's more impact. So for us, we don't have intentions of really staying in Canada. It's just sort of where we started. It's sort of our backyard. When we look across the border to the States, we know that across the border, there are, probably 10x more impact that we can kind of create. And when we look at, unemployment rates, even between Canada and the US, right, it's, we're sort of miles apart. So for us, Toronto is sort of kind of what we call it as our backyard that we're experimenting in. And then likely once we've sort of validated the product and we can prove out product impact fit, we're looking to go across borders. But to answer that question, I guess more poignantly, I mean, one of the things we've noticed, and just from here in the tech ecosystem in Toronto, is that there are so many people that are actually, and I found this when I was sort of recruiting or hiring, there's so many people that are looking to make more of an impact with their day-to-day. And yes, there are amazing, cool tech companies that you can work for, but I've always found that, some of the most enlightening conversations have been, hey, I didn't know there was a company like Ample where I can take what I do in my daytime job and actually apply it to a very complex social problem that is, going to get worse if we don't do something about it. So I think the amount of talent and expertise out there that's actually looking to make a difference with what they do is definitely one thing that stood out to me.
And Arsene?
Great. Yeah, so that makes total sense. I would say that definitely Toronto and Canada being our quote unquote backyard, obviously where you live, this is where you're raised. So you obviously are going to start here, right? And then eventually grow. But beyond that, some of the things that I've personally noticed is that talent here in Canada, compared to many other cities down in the States, it's definitely very very attractive and very present. and something that we've been able to benefit as a startup. Like, I mean, our first hires were fresh graduates out of university, right? And they were able to contribute so much to what we have been able to accomplish in our early days. And I think that that's something that that we're truly blessed to have, right? Especially with the great universities that we have here in Toronto and Montreal in computer science or AI and machine learning. So that would be one. I would also like to add the fact that as a startup, it's a lot more affordable to hire here in Canada, and also to even get an office space, right? I mean, like, you have a lot of big US companies, tech companies moving here to Canada because of the talent that we have here and because of how much more affordable it is, right? And I know a lot of interviews that I've ran, a lot of candidates that have been applying to jobs that we've had who are coming straight from the US. It's interesting. I've seen this pattern where a lot of them have salary expectations that are almost double what some would have here in Canada, right? And you know, as a startup, every penny counts, and you really have to make sure that you optimize how you're working, and you also make sure that you're fair. But it's definitely been an advantage on that front. So that would be number two. And then my last point, which again we've been able to take advantage of, would be government programs, right? The government has done a great job in supporting startups like us, and more specifically, the SHRED program and the IRAP programs have helped us a lot at Telostouch in our early days, and still till this day, we're still being able to tap into those programs. So it's great.
No, that's really interesting, and I think the government support is really a thing that we excel at, and it's a great advantage to be in Canada. And how would you encourage someone to stay in Canada? Like, beyond the access to talent and the government support, do you think that it's better to be here versus we have this where a startup gets to a specific scale and then it wants to move down to the States? It thinks that's the only place it can get the money. How would you want to sell Canada to them?
Absolutely. So for that, I would say two things, right? Number one, after going to many conferences down in the US and being part of different incubators there, and interacting with different startups and different people, you really truly get to appreciate Canada when you come back, because down there you always get this feeling, at least in my opinion, my experience has been a very cutthroat mentality of kill or be killed, right? And when you come back to Canada, everyone's a lot more warmer, right? Like interactions like what I'm having with CJ right now, right? Like we may go back and get a drink after and sit down and share ideas, right? And you really truly feel like there's a certain amount of support that you get from people who are going through the same experiences, and they genuinely care about what you're building and what you're doing. And I think that as a startup, you really need that support in the early stages. And I know we did, and we were very lucky to have that. So number one is the support and just the community aspect to things that we get here in Canada. And number two, I would have to say is number two would have to be diversity. Right? The fact that we're able to have people who come from so many different walks of lives, who have so many different experiences, who are able to come in and contribute in their own way here in Canada, I think is very special, because I truly believe that you cannot have innovation without diversity, because in order to innovate, you need people from different perspectives to come together and to really find solutions to problems that already exist. And that's something that we're fortunate enough to have here in Canada as well. So those, from my experience, those would be the two things that I would pitch to anyone who's thinking of starting a company in Canada or the US.
Oh, that's great. And CG, if you had anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I definitely agree with what Arsene is saying. I think the question you really have to ask yourself, I guess, is, what sector do you plan to play in? So my perspective is a little bit different in that, when we look at who are our competitors and who else is doing what we're doing, I can maybe point to, say, one other company in Canada that's really doing it, that's really sort of on the cutting edge of innovation, leveraging technology to tackle this complex problem. But I can point to like 10 to 15 to 20 players down in the States. And so for us, I think it's a more of a different perspective, because for us to prove that, product impact fit, we have to go to a market, we have to go to a government that is open, that is willing. And, we actually believe that, there's going to be more of that in the US, just from some of these initial conversations that we've had in places like San Francisco and LA. And, when you look at sort of, does Canada even admit to having like a homelessness problem, right? Like, we know that San Francisco or LA is the capital of homelessness. So they're aware enough to know that, hey, we need help, we need adoption. I feel like the conversations in Canada, and we've chatted with everybody kind of up and down the province, the feds, at the municipal level. I feel like there's still sort of this denial that we don't really have a problem, and until you can admit that you have a problem, you can't adapt, you can't innovate, right? So I think our perspective is a little bit different, just because of the sector that we're in. But I echo what Arsene is saying. I think one thing 100% is talent. You're gonna get double. You're gonna have to pay double for everything down there. And so if you're gonna pick and choose your talent, we have an amazing talent pool here.
Okay, no, that's very, very interesting, and I think what you both also are offering is products are a little different than what's typical in the Canadian ecosystem. And that's probably a great uniqueness of perspective, because typically Canadian firms are pushing the frontiers of research. We're very notorious for being responsible for, the first innovations in deep learning, OpenAI, founded by Canadians who moved down to the States, all these great research labs here. But you hear much less about Canadian products. Maybe Ecobee is a great example that you were at before, Shopify, great technology giant. But you guys are really focused on building practical products. So can you tell us a little bit about the technology that you use and your approach to using technology to solve a problem? We'll start with CG.
Yeah, sure. So for us, it was really through that experience of, going sort of through navigating and trying to figure out help with our friend Simon, that we started to do sort of an audit, or I guess you could say, research on like, hey, what else is out there? So when someone is in this situation where, they're experiencing homelessness for the first time, where they don't know what to do, they're completely overwhelmed, what do people do? Where do they turn to? And we found that through a lot of generative research that people were actually turning to Google. I mean, many people were not familiar with 211, that, hey, there's a service that you could call, or there's all of these directories. And so we did experiment, aside from the chatbot, like the conversational AI, we experimented with other user interfaces. And then, what kind of really took off with the chatbot or a conversational AI is that, number one, it was completely anonymous. We actually found that many people did not even reveal their situation to close friends or family members, because of the shame that's associated with having to be in a very tough spot. So people didn't really want to call a number or talk to somebody, or if they did, we heard that people would oftentimes get judged by the services that they were requesting. So the anonymity was really interesting. And the other thing was sort of just being able to ask a question and get an answer, right? If I go to Google and I'm like, what do? I may have to read through threads of Reddit. I may have to be bouncing from government website to government website to figure out what programs are out there for me. And so that's already very taxing. And, it's, if I'm experiencing, there's an additional cognitive load that is on the user to figure out what to do. The beauty about a conversation is I can literally ask it a question, get an answer, and then the chatbot starts to be a triaging tool to basically lead me down paths or expose me to things that I didn't know that existed. And that's a common thing that we see with people who are first-time homeless, is that 80 to 90% of the services that they're eligible for, they're unaware of. And so what happens is you have people who don't know what they can do, don't know what they can turn to, and they kind of start to go on this decline of a slippery slope. And so, from I guess you could say a practical terms, the technology made sense for end users, and that's the only reason why we would choose it. If it's emerging and we want to leverage it, but it doesn't make sense for our end users, we may not be so open to adapt.
No, that's a very interesting perspective. So it's really, validating the use case first. And what was the process of developing this chatbot that you mentioned? Was it something that you had to do a lot of technical research into developing, or did you find it pretty straightforward to find the tools to build it?
Yeah, I mean everything in a typical, software development cycle. So you start with, yeah, what is your business case? Or for us, it was more of what is a use case to our end user because we weren't, in the beginning we weren't thinking who can we sell this to? What is, what's sort of the ROI? It's purely how can we make an impact on our end user. So, typical sort of cycle of product development. But what's really interesting here is, number one, if we're talking about and maybe just to set some context. So in North America, 94% of people experiencing homelessness own a mobile phone, 77% own a smartphone. And in Canada, about 90% of people that experience homelessness are hidden. So they're not folks that we typically think about, right? Someone who's sleeping outside, someone who's asking for money. They look a lot more like you and I. And so that's why they're hidden. Sort of that's the academic term. And so the first question is, okay, if I want to talk to these people, where are they? How do I even find them? How do I interview my end users if I can't find them? So for us, I think we literally had to slow down the product development cycle so that at every stage of wireframing to prototyping to usability testing, that we incorporated the voices of those with lived experience. And we wanted to not interfere the product from our own experiences, because I can say, hey, if I were in this situation, I would look for services that way. But have I ever been into that situation? So I think for us, it's being very intentional about slowing down that cycle and incorporating the voices or the experiences of our end users into the actual product itself.
Okay, very interesting. And Arsene, if you want to fill us in a little bit about the technology and product approach that Telostouch uses.
Yep, absolutely. So first, I think that I think that going the route of doing purely product, like solving solutions from a product point of view, to versus doing it from pushing the boundaries of research or pushing the limits, right? I think that it's on a per use basis, right? It's on a use case basis, and I think that for both CJ and myself, like CJ and myself, we found that the best problems that we found within these industries were by providing a product with X features that would be practical and a practical solution, right? So through a user research process and wireframing process and right, like user feedback and all of that, right, you end up with a solution. And I think that if you are a startup where the core product is whether it's machine learning or AI and whatnot, then absolutely you need to go out there and push the limits of whatever you're offering, because that is the only way you're going to stay competitive, right? But for us, our product was really to provide a solution for advisors to better understand their clients, because we like to see, we like to say the term that how can you track a $10 Uber ride, but you're not able to get the same transparency from the person managing your lifelong assets, right? So we went around it from that point of view, and we had to completely open things up and provide that transparency to financial advisors on their clients and to clients on their financial advisors, so that there is more trust happening between both parties, and also advisors empowered to provide the right recommendations for their clients. So with that, the practical solution was a product that had certain functionalities for remote engagement to reveal offline data that institutions didn't have. And that's what we came up with. And then also, as time goes, we're finding ourselves that we're going to have to start pushing the boundaries, right? So that's also the beautiful thing about innovation, that as time goes on, you're going to have to keep innovating. And at a certain level, you're going to have to push the limits of a certain technological field. And we're starting to get into that, and more of it will happen in the future.
Yeah, so that's actually quite fascinating, because what both of you have mentioned is this approach of noticing the problem first, noticing what you wanted to solve first. And like the technology seems very, very downstream from doing whatever it takes to solve your problem. And that's actually conventionally not what we hear about Canadians, right? Like, I think a lot of experiments we hear about, like even with the failed Sidewalk Toronto project, it's like the spectacle of the technology first. People here are very good engineers. They're very good innovators, they're very good researchers, and then finding that product that they actually have to build is typically spoken of as a kind of challenge. I'm wondering if you think that there's some kind of mindset that Canadians have that prioritizes one or the other, and how we can get more of this product problem-driven mindset out there.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Ryan. And I would say when we started, I think we took more of the first approach that you're talking about. We were so excited as a team, of people who work in tech. We're building all like these amazing products all day. And so in the beginning, we took a very product or technology first approach where we were really trying to fit a technology into a problem that our end users have. So we began to experiment with voice, like very, very early day. We said, okay, I can type a question or I can literally speak to it, right? If I speak to my Google Home or Alexa, and I think, at the time, we didn't have, I think the adoption of, the Alexas and the Google Homes also weren't there yet. So the voice itself as a technology wasn't sort of robust enough so that when we began to put it in front of people and we began to say, hey, just speak to it with your voice and it'll answer you, because it couldn't capture, the nuances of, say, accents or things like that, right? So when you look at, at the time we could only conduct usability tests with those that were living within shelters. So they weren't necessarily hidden homeless. They were, probably more transitionally homeless. What you have is a lot of refugees or newcomers. And so because the technology couldn't really understand what they were saying, they were even more frustrated trying to speak to an AI versus just typing it out. So when we took a technology first approach, we just found oftentimes we're kind of trying to fit a technology into a use case. When we kind of took a step back and looked at it the other way, what we're finding now is that so cities, enjoy the technology. Now cities are coming to us and say, hey, we have this other problem where there are immigrants and refugees. Now we need translation. So by taking more of a, I would say, impact first approach, eventually the adoption of this technology comes. And like Arsene said, once you can prove to a customer that something works, they're going to want more of it, right? So I think doing it in this way is less forceful. So yeah, that's kind of just what we've learned.
And Arsene?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think I was muted there, but absolutely. I would say think about the most popular applications or products out there, right? Like these are the most simplest products that maybe you and I think we could have probably came up with it, right? Like think of Uber, right? Like it makes all the sense in the world, right? You grab, right? You start ordering your cab through this application, and that connects you to a driver, right? Or think of Amazon, or think, right? So a lot of products that provide the greatest amount of value are oftentimes the most simplest implementations, right? And I think that that is an approach that definitely needs to be thought of as people decide to solve problems, and not to go into it thinking that the user wants something like a new emerging technology or something else or whatever, but be practical about things and really thinking about the user, having some of that user empathy, right? So some design thinking techniques where you can really sit down with the user and really understand some of the frustrations that they're having, or some of the problems that they're having. And I think that just like CG, this is something that we had to go through as well, right? Because when you're starting new, you're excited, you want to throw everything at it, right? But then as you start speaking to the user, you realize that oftentimes you're overbuilding and you're doing a lot more than what you should really be doing, right? So you got to stick to the most valuable product, which is oftentimes 20% of whatever you have thought of building, right? And you decide to just shrink things down, then you end up with something a lot smaller. And in our case, the first version of our product that we sold, it was massive, not you could possibly imagine, right? Super hard to maintain, had featured this, had that, had everything, right? And we had to shrink it down, and now the version of the product that we have now is maybe 20% of what it used to be, a lot lighter, a lot easier, and people love it, and the value that they're getting out of it is a lot more than what they were getting before. So I think that it's definitely a better approach in terms of providing core value. And I think that it's very important for every entrepreneur, aspiring entrepreneur out there, to always think about value driven approach rather than thinking of cool solutions to add to the team. So, yeah,
absolutely. So we only have one more question I'm going to ask you before going to the Q&A. So I'd like the attendees, if they have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A panel button that you'll see on your login app. But yeah, just the final question that I have to ask of you guys is just, what piece of advice would you give to Canadians who are thinking of starting a startup? What would you say that they should look at? How should they approach getting into a business? What is the key thing that Canadians need as motivation to start their company, to push them over that edge? TG, if you would like to start.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't try to convince anybody to stay anywhere in a place that doesn't make sense for them and what they want to accomplish. So I think the question is really, what in Canada can you sort of leverage to the best of your abilities? What's blooming? What windows of opportunities are there in this, very crazy time for what you want to do? So I think it still goes back to my approach is, what is the sector that you're in? What are you really trying to accomplish? And when you look around in Canada, what is out there for you to leverage to help you accomplish that thing and really make that decision from there? So, I love that, because of what's happening across the border. There are tons of talent flooding into Canada. But if you're starting out, does Canada, does Toronto, just because it's your backyard and we kind of just started here without giving it too much thought, but does it make sense, right? Because oftentimes what I find myself and our team is, we feel like we're pushing a lot of these boulders up a hill where we don't find that same boulder, or that boulder is much smaller across the border. So again, my advice is, what can you leverage here? What are the team and I talked about it? And does that make sense for you? And if it doesn't, maybe you don't start in Canada, right? I mean, we're all working remotely. Like we're hiring talent from, from the Middle East, from Asia. Like this is so like there's literally no borders now. We can engage, we can do corporate engagement with companies from San Francisco. Like there's literally no borders. So I would really maybe take some time and think, why Canada? What can you leverage? And does that make sense for you? And if the answer is no, then maybe don't start in Canada.
All right. And Arsene?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that with, so I'm going to piggyback off what CJ said, which is with what happened with COVID, really, there's no borders anymore, right? So you can literally start anywhere. And but one thing that I will say is, really understand that, understand the great benefits to starting a business here in Canada, which we mentioned on this call, right? Which is the fact that our government, thankfully, has been very, very supportive towards small businesses, and our immigration policies as well have also led to that growth, right? And I think that that is a wonderful opportunity, and to definitely take advantage of that. That worked out for us, and honestly, I'm very happy that this is the place that we got to start, right? Because I wouldn't have started it any other place. So I definitely am going to side on the side of starting here in Canada. But beyond that, if you want to start a company, it's definitely no easy task. So one thing that I would say for sure that is absolutely important is to do your research, really understand who the user is, exactly who the user is, what's in the market, and think about the problems and not the solutions, because it's something that a lot of people really think about first, right? Like, oh, wow, I have this crazy idea. What if I build this and build that and build that? No, right? Like, you have to start with, this is the pain point. Isn't there a better solution for that? Right? Why hasn't anyone solved it? And is it an urgent problem to solve right now? Right? So I think that that little piece of advice can help a lot of people out there, and can maybe save you from a lot of years of trial and error. So yeah.
Okay. So let's get to some of the questions that we've been asked. The first one is about the values of a society, and they ask, is building a foundation based on socially and ethically sound values and decisions important to you? Do Canadian values, for example, affect the business roadmap that you have?
One thing I can kind of speak to here, what I find very interesting, kind of as a observer, during COVID, during BLM, during defund the police, the riots, and kind of, observing all of these happening in our societies and, thinking about, oh, how is Canada sort of reacting? How is the US? I would say from like a diversity and inclusion, and Arsene alluded to this, I would say that Canada is far more like we know how to have a conversation around a lot of things that just feels like, a lot of conversations maybe aren't being had or maybe aren't being had appropriately from across the border. So I feel like from a, what kind of values or ethics are you bringing into your company? And I mean, this is one question that we get that probably comes up in every conversation is, what are you doing about data? What are you doing about privacy, security? How are you storing data of potentially, hundreds of thousands of vulnerable people's, interactions or things like that, right? So that comes up first. And so I do think the thing about Canada is that a lot of these conversations or these concepts are very mature here. And so as a result, we kind of naturally bake that into our companies. And I would say that's probably foundational, right? You start with your values. Like when I was listening to Brian Chesky talk about when they had to do that Airbnb layoff, one of the things he said is, before they made that layoff, they went back to their values. What are their values? And every single decision from COVID was made from there.
Okay. And so we'll only have time for one more question, so I'll briefly ask it to you both. This is a good one. So do your products benefit from outsourcing certain aspects of infrastructure and technology, or do you build everything end to end inside your startups? Which model would you suggest works best for new startups?
Yeah, so I'm going to take that one too. Because we've been through I guess over the years we experimented with both, right? And we've gotten to a point where we truly understand what parts of our solutions are worth outsourcing and what parts are not. And I would say that anywhere on your product, for us anyway, anywhere that is about innovation and truly requires a lot of interactions, right? We've kept it in-house, though this was before COVID. And now post-COVID, since everyone's working remotely, it's not that big of a difference. It's not that big of a difference anymore. But I think that's still the formula that stays true. And anything that is a repetitive work or that requires specific expertise, right? That is something definitely you should outsource, right? Whether you're doing a specific integration with a particular platform, right? Then you go and get those experts, or you have a project that requires specific expertise, then you bring that in-house as well. So definitely a hybrid model matters a lot and is important.
Great. I thank you both for spending time with us here today and sharing your really, really valuable insights. And hope you had fun, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference as well. I will pass it on.